Our guest today is Jessica Rusch. Jessie is a mom of two and registered dietitian who suggests we view our kids and ourselves as premium cars that need premium gasoline when it comes to thinking about nutrition. She shares some great tips to help you do this even with those picky eaters you might have at home. I'm Jeannie.
And I'm Tom. We are a brother-sister team who are passionate about providing parents, teachers, and coaches with ideas and strategies to help kids and teens build their resilience and achieve their potential in a healthy, fulfilling way. Welcome to the Raising Resilient Kids podcast.
Our question of the month is, how important is nutrition in strengthening mental health, building resilience in youth? And I've never been more excited or more relaxed for a conversation that we're going to have with one of our guests because we have my best friend here to answer it.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here.
We live across the country from each other, so we don't get to see each other that often. So when we wanted to have Jessie on as a guest, I was like, this is perfect because we get to have a great guest, but I also get to have a conversation with my best friend. So Jess, what do you think for that question? How important is nutrition in strengthening mental health and building resilience in youth?
It's obviously what we're putting into our body. Like food is fuel. And I've used this analogy before too, but I feel like you have to kind of look at our bodies as premium cars. You want to put that premium gasoline in your car because you want to operate well. You don't want a lot of trips to the doctor. You want to avoid diseases or complications and that kind of thing. It's really important starting early with like good habits and stuff, because I do see that a lot where people are later in life. It's like they're trying to reverse all these bad habits. It's like if you had established that at a younger age, then you won't be dealing with all these problems later in life where you're trying to like get on a better diet. I think, with kids too, it's like there's just so much research to support what they're eating really affects just how mentally, physically they operate, and even socially. When I think about mentally, there's something called like the gut-brain barrier. Even like something simple like having breakfast in the morning, there's just research to support that you just concentrate better when you actually have a meal in the morning versus going on an empty stomach. And then of course, physically, if you want to do better in sports, you got to fuel yourself properly. You're going to be faster. You're going to be able to, again, that mental connection, that's so important too. You have to mentally be there to concentrate. So if you're not fueling yourself properly, you're not going to have that in sports or just any kind of functioning during the day. And then there's that social aspect. I really believe that families should sit together, have a good meal, have that sort of that connection at meals. A lot of times that's the only time during the day that people can sit down with their kids when they're so busy, is like with that meal. So that is a chance to let your hair down and actually connect with your family members over like a good meal. So I just feel like nutrition just plays into so much: mental, physical, social. It's very important.
It is important to have breakfast, but when you've got kind of a nervous stomach, if a kid's got a nervous stomach and they've got, a big test that day, a presentation they have to do, like, how do you balance that? What's your suggestion for those situations?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when there's no appetite kind of there, one thing I would recommend is, a lot of times you don't necessarily feel like sitting down for like a huge meal, but even something like a low sugar, like protein shake, just something you could sip on just to get a little bit of nutrition in you. I feel like that would go a little bit farther than having nothing at all. You can make your own protein shake, or you could buy like a pre-made one, as long as it's got a good balance of stuff going on in there. So that could be just something to like sip on slowly, just to get some kind of nutrition in. I don't necessarily want someone forcing themselves to eat if they're going to like get sick because of that. But I would say something like that would probably be a good go-to.
Well, and even then something like that, a kid could maybe have that on the car ride to school.
Exactly. Yeah. Because the worst thing you would want to be is like in the middle of a test and your stomach's like grumbling then at that point. So just trying to get some kind of like nutrient dense food in your system, smaller amount of like a high calorie packed with a little bit of nutrition. That's my best recommendation.
That makes complete sense. I wish I would have known that back in grade school, high school, because it was, you'd get in the test and I'd be like dead tired. I'd just be drained because I hadn't had anything. But then when I did try to have a big breakfast, my stomach was bothering me. So that's,
Think about it. Tom, you would have gone to Yale or Harvard had you just known just to sip on a protein shake.
I don't know.
4.0.
A lot of.
Hey, I ate, but like, I've come a long way because I used to eat Pop-Tarts as a kid. I could probably put down 5 like Long John donuts as a kid with chocolate milk. So like, I was not the example of like what to do
Well,
before
but that's a
each
good
test
thing.
like
You
that.
you
So
are proof that, like, listen, the goal, I'm sure, as a parent, is you want to provide your kids with the best foundation possible. But the reality is that sometimes that's not going to happen, and that you can find interest in it later in life as you have to go like, okay, wait a second, maybe 5
exactly.
Long John
Mhm.
Donuts isn't the best decision. I'll go with one or
Right,
half.
exactly.
Speaking of 5 Long John Donuts, what if you've got a kid who only eats donuts? What if you got that picky eater? So I have one of my kids is a picky eater, and she is
Yeah.
officially an adult, and she is still at 18 a picky eater. Any suggestions for that?
I know that can definitely be hard. I mean, I have 2 kids, so I totally get the struggle. The struggle is real. So again, it's developing those habits like early in life, really trying to work with, a toddler and introduce a lot of different foods. One thing that really stuck out with me when I learned about pediatric nutrition is that it takes about 13 times for a child to like try something before they
Oh,
Wow.
completely
wow.
dismiss it. Also, tastes change. Like, one week I'll buy like something for my daughter and then she'll eat it for that entire week. And then the next week she's like, I don't
Mm,
want to have anything to do with it. But then she'll come back to it eventually. So it's never just like dismissing a food completely. I think kids just get
Mhm.
finicky and they're fickle and they change their minds and they want something different. I also believe in setting like
Yeah.
a good example as a parent. Obviously, you don't want to be telling your kid what to do and then you're like, behind their back, like,
You're
going
eating
to
the
get
Long
fast
John
food or
Donuts
something
behind
like
their back.
that.
yeah.
Got it.
Exactly. But that also goes to say too, I think
Mm,
involving them in the
yeah.
process of planning meals and even
Mm,
shopping, like having your kid come with you to, pick out foods and things like that to try, that kind of
Sure.
empowers them a little bit. And makes them feel important and part of the process. I'm not against also sneaking in
yeah.
foods into like, sometimes foods. So like I used to put cauliflower rice in my daughter's
Okay.
like mac and cheese just
Sure.
to kind of get a vegetable in. Spinach is another great
Mhm.
thing where you can like sneak that in. Like you could pulverize spinach in a protein
Yep.
shake and you
Ah,
could barely taste it. Finding other ways like protein pasta
Okay.
is great for that reason too, where if you're looking to get extra protein, like there's a lot of like products that add a little extra protein. So I'm not against that either. I think also not putting foods on a
Mm.
platform either. Like you'll get a cookie
ah,
after dinner if you
Oh.
finish your dinner. It's kind of like if you set out the cookie with that meal, it's not like putting that cookie on a platform. And I think also eating together, like I
mhm,
said, that's huge as a family. If you're all eating the same thing, you're demonstrating that you're eating it as well. So they're not going to be as resistant if you all are eating different things. I would say making sure you get a
Mm.
multivitamin in just to
okay.
cover all your bases too. And then, I'm also a fan of your kid likes a certain vegetable,
Sure.
really lean into that vegetable. Maybe try different ways to prepare that vegetable. That way, it makes it more interesting. So you're not eating the same vegetable all the time, but maybe trying to find different recipes to sort of mix it up.
I like too what you
Yeah,
said about, the modeling, but the grocery shopping. Again, I'm not a parent, and I don't personally like to go grocery shopping. I'm sure going with a child like adds an amount of stress that is at times unbearable. But I will say I have plenty of childhood memories being really young going to the grocery store with my mom. There is something that is memorable about that, and I can imagine as a kid if my mom was like, "Okay, well, here, like let's pick out some things that you might think that you want to eat." I do feel like that would be really empowering
sure.
and memorable, would make me feel like an adult. And so it's an interesting
Yeah,
suggestion that, for that day that maybe you're feeling a little more patient. You're like, I will bring my child with me to the grocery
yeah,
store.
exactly.
you know.
Because I can't say like when we go to the grocery store, my kids are like, "Ooh, grapes! Ooh, cantaloupe!" Like they're like, "I want that!" Like
Well,
chips
going
and like
back to the
really
Pop-Tart thing, that's
cereal.
what when I brought my daughter with me shopping, I always said, it has to be on the list. You could pick one thing that's not on the list,
Oh,
and it was always Pop-Tarts. It was
Oh,
always Pop-Tarts.
that's
Pop-Tarts are delicious.
funny. Yeah, and I think that's important too because again, I am not perfect by any means as a parent. Like I feel like it's a struggle day after day and I think it's like a
Mhm.
balance. You have to really balance. I always go by that 80-20 rule. Like 80% of the time try to stay on track, 20% of the time allow yourself a little bit of freedom because I definitely don't want to be that parent where I'm
Mhm.
depriving my kid of something and then they're going to a friend's house and they're like,
Yeah, right.
"Oh my gosh,
Sure.
Oreos!" And they like eat about 12
Yes.
Oreos because they've never
Yeah.
had an Oreo in their life. So it's also, having that fine balance of just letting them have a little bit of freedom. So I love that you said that because it's like, okay, well, like we have a grocery list. We want to stay on track, but, have something
Mhm.
fun included as well. So,
I think too the modeling that you said, and this made me think of our mom and dad, who Jesse knows very well. And I think about like when I was a kid
yeah,
through college, Jesse can attest to this. We lived together. I was so messy. I was busy and I would be really cluttered. My room would be a mess. And my mom always had a clean house. And now as an adult, I'm
sure.
far tidier and far cleaner, so much less cluttered. And I really I attribute that to the fact that my mom modeled that.
I will say, like, especially with teenage years, because I know, Tom, you do a lot of work with like teenagers and stuff too. So it is having that healthy relationship with
Mm.
food too, because I feel like I kind of borderline dealt with
Mhm.
like an eating disorder. So that was like such a
Sure.
hard time in my life, I feel. Just kind of falling into that peer pressure of body image and all of that, and not having the best relationship with food, and not even really knowing what to do in terms of nutrition. And so I don't like labeling foods like good, bad foods, because I don't want that to be like to kind
Sure.
of lead to those like bad behaviors, or like some sort of like eating disorder like that, where it's like,
Right.
oh, you can't eat that,
Right.
that's a
Yeah.
bad food, versus, I like the idea of like sometimes food, always food, like kind of
Ah,
a good spin on it.
I like that sometime always. That's a great idea. What about any resources you have that you recommend? Any websites, books that parents can
Sure, yeah, I wish I could give you guys like great books, but as a busy parent, I
Right,
don't get a
yeah.
lot of reading time. Social media, I feel like, is obviously it can be kind of crazy, but in terms of good resources, I'm
Oh,
all
I love
about
this.
Instagram, following good
Okay.
quality people on Instagram that
Yeah.
have the credentials, obviously. They offer like quick tips, very visual. That you could read their stories too. Like they'll be like, oh, this is having to do with like
Sure.
proper eating hygiene, how to get your kids to eat vegetables. So it's a great thing to follow. So there's definitely a lot that I follow
Okay.
on Instagram, like
Okay.
Melanie Paddock. She's great. She offers a lot of great tips. There's another one, Jennifer Anderson. Hers is called
Mm.
Kids Eat in Color. So they just offer a lot of great tips. They're registered dietitians. My favorite one is
Okay.
Feeding
Ooh,
Littles, which is a dietitian, and she was working also with an occupational therapist. So I think that relationship is really cool, where you get like sort of that nutrition knowledge, but the occupational therapist comes into play, where it's like something as simple as your kid, when they sit down to eat, like their feet should be flat on the floor.
Oh,
They should be in a proper chair, for example, because that allows them to focus better, and they're not like messing around and like trying to adjust in their
sure.
chair because they're uncomfortable. Like just simple tips, kind of breaking it down. So having them as a team, I felt like this is the
Yeah.
best
yeah.
Instagram.
Well, I always say that I would never want to be like a doctor or a nurse because all my family and friends would be calling me like, "Oh, I have this illness. Like, can you tell me what it is?" And I've come to learn over being friends with Jessie for so long and this becoming her profession that I would also never want to be a dietitian because
Yeah.
all of our girlfriends, we have a closed group, there's 5 of us. We are always asking Jessie questions about like, "What is this? Should I eat this? What can I do to lose weight?"
I
Thank goodness you
love
love it.
it.
And we're on
No.
a big text thread. We text pretty much every single day and text about all different kinds of things. 4 of them are moms. And so I get to read a lot of questions that they're asking back and forth about all the things about the kids. But recently, one of our girlfriends did reach out to Jessie about replacements for a yogurt. And so it got me thinking about this question about, are there certain things that you look for, like when you're purchasing foods for your kids? What do you kind of aim to find?
I'll be honest, I don't have a huge
Mm-hmm.
like list, like when I go to the grocery store, where I'm like looking, where, oh my gosh,
Sure.
there's so much to look at. But I would say the added
Got it.
sugar is definitely
Yeah.
something I do look for. So the added sugar is like a recent thing that has
Oh,
been added to labels, because there's naturally occurring sugar, and then there's sugar that's like added by that company for extra flavor. So I'm so glad that they started adding that, because I didn't want people looking at fruit and being
sure.
like, well, this has sugar in it,
Right.
like it's bad. It's like, no, even milk has natural sugar in it. Any kind of starch is going to have natural sugar in it. So it's that added sugar that I'm like always looking at. Definitely don't want to exceed more than like 20% of the daily value
Okay.
of that
Okay.
added sugar. So that can
Sure.
be tricky. I'm not going to lie. So cereals, I definitely pay attention with
Okay.
that. Yogurts, I'm trying to think of like some other things. A lot of
Sure.
bars out there too,
Mhm.
I feel like have a lot of added sugar in it. So you just have to be kind of looking at that. And that leads into the next thing that I would say too to look for is looking for products that just have
Mm.
very wholesome ingredients as much as possible. Like I think of the bars now. Like one bar that I always
Yeah.
give my kids is Lara bars because it's like
Sure.
4 ingredients in there. And then I also like to look for fiber. I think a good rule of thumb, if you're looking at any kind of starches or products like that, 3 grams of fiber or
Okay.
more per serving is a good way to go about it. Because that just keeps, I think kids
Mhm.
sometimes deal with irregularity in terms of like bowel movements and stuff. So if you can kind of get that fiber in, I feel like that is just great. So yeah, I'd say, whole foods are always better, but that
Mhm.
again can be very challenging with kids, obviously. So just trying to, look for those alternatives. So
Awesome. Awesome. Jessie, you're the
yeah.
best. I say it all the time. One of the smartest people that I know in her field, and I just appreciate you sharing your expertise with our listeners, and it was really good to see you early this morning. It's such a we should do this all the time.
Yes, it was so fun. I know, seriously, I would love to. This is really fun. So thank you so
Thanks,
much
Jess.
for having me.
Thanks, Jess. That was great to have Jessie.
Isn't it so great to have? She's just so smart, and she's such a mom. Like, she just gets it.
She does. What was your takeaway from all that good stuff?
Well, there were a couple things. Number one is something that is repeated, I feel like, in every one of these podcasts that we do, and it's the idea of modeling. And I think it's a really realistic, I hope, approach for a parent. Because I mean, I have a lot of people in my life that are parents, and I see how overwhelming it can be at times. And obviously they want to do what is best for their kids. But I think what Jessie said here is just a reminder that, like, hey, you just trying your best, that is going to sink into your kids' heads. You can like read the books and do the research and learn all these things, but the reality is, like, if you're just trying your best, your kids will see that. You modeling it is one of the most powerful things that you can do.
Yeah, I think, and kind of how you mentioned about the clean house and mom, how it doesn't always show up when they're that age. And I've seen that with my kids too. When they were younger, they did not necessarily do the same things that Linda and I did with healthy, eating habits and things like that. Yep. But as they're getting older, they're starting to pick up those habits, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
They were paying attention all those years.
Yeah, they really are. Kids are smarter than what we think. And then in the same vein of, when we asked Jessie about, what books do you do, right? Like, what are these? Right. And she's like, listen, I have no time to read books, okay? I have 2 kids. I'm a full-time working mom. I'm a wife. I'm a daughter. I'm all of these things. Parents deserve time to be able just to sit and scroll social media. If that's what you want to do, do it. And that you can learn things from that. We look at social media sometimes as such a negative thing, and there's certainly a lot of truth in that. But there also are so many great resources on social media. So don't feel so bad when you're scrolling on social media. Use that to be able to have some free time and also learn something at, the same time. What about for you?
A couple things that really stood out. One, me, I've got that nervous stomach that I've had my whole life. And I thought maybe a little piece of a protein bar and like a banana might be enough, because that kind of is not upsetting to my stomach.
Sure.
So almost having both myself and kids test out, what is not upsetting to the stomach that you can just have a little snack of to get that energy for when you have a big test or a big game or a concert performance or something like that.
Yeah.
So you've got the energy to do it, but you don't have that queasy stomach that goes along with it.
Yeah.
The other thing, I like the sometimes and always food rather than good food and bad food.
Yes.
I think that's a great terminology to use.
Yeah. I know my husband's going to bring that up because I have a tendency to eat a lot of sometimes foods.
Yeah.
He tells me I eat like a 7-year-old kid sometimes. I would not be a great modeler for my children if I had any, but I thought like that. You're right. That is like a very gentle way to think about foods. It's not like it's a never food. You can't touch it. It's just a sometimes food.
Yeah.
I love it.
Great.
Love it.
All right. Another great one.
Jessie, thanks so much for being on the podcast. And thank you so much to you for listening. We will see you next month.
The Raising Resilient Kids podcast is sponsored by Happy You're Here, educational, safe, and joyful videos for kids. Through music, visuals, and sound, your baby, toddler, and preschooler will learn about letters, numbers, and so much more. Happy You're Here is quality screen time that both kiddos and their adults can feel good about. Head to www.youtube.com/@SoHappyYouAreHere to check it out,
or click on the link in the show notes.
The Raising Resilient Kids podcast is also sponsored by the Resilient Youth Program. If you're a parent, teacher, or school administrator who wants to incorporate a proven resiliency building program into your school's curriculum, then the Resilient Youth Teach the Teacher program is exactly what you need. This curriculum brings coping skills and life management tools into the school environment to help students better manage daily stress and positively impact their academic performance, mental health, and well-being. For more information, visit the Resilient Youth Teach the Teacher website in the show notes or at www.smarthwp.com/RY4teachers. That's www.smarthwp.com/RY4teachers. The Raising Resilient Kids podcast is produced, hosted, and edited by brother and sister team Tom and Jeannie Klishevitz. Do you have a question you would like answered by one of our expert guests? If so, visit www.smarthwp.com/Raising Resilient Kids podcast. Thanks for listening.